Autumn came early to the high plains of southeastern Colorado in the year of 1934. The wind had a sharpness to it, like it remembered winter too well. Dust curled around fence posts and gathered in dry whirlwinds across the open road. The land stretched out in brittle silence, brown and gray and stung by drought. The cottonwoods along the dry riverbed still held to their leaves, but only just. They clung the way a woman clings when she has run out of choices. Mary Ellen Carver drove with both hands on the wheel of the old Ford truck, her fingers pale from the grip. The windows rattled in their frames, and the bench seat beneath her creaked with every rut in the dirt road. In the bed of the truck sat a stripped-down stove, a rocker with one leg cracked, and a child's iron bed frame tied down with frayed rope. Her boys, Ethan and Thomas, sat in the cab beside her, silent. Ethan, 10, stared straight ahead. Thomas, 7, had his face pressed to the window, mouthing something to the passing trees. Neither asked where they were going. They'd asked once, back in Kansas, and she'd said west. That had been enough. Her husband had died in spring. Not all at once, but slow and cruel. The kind of death that strips a man of dignity before it takes the breath. Consumption, the doctor said. Truth was, Will Carver had given up long before his lungs did. He'd lost his work, then his land, then his pride. Mary had sat with him through the worst of it, holding his hand even as his words turned bitter. She had buried him in soil too dry to take a proper spade. She wept once. Then she packed what she could and left the rest behind. Now the truck climbed a rise and leveled out into a long stretch of ranch land. Barbed wire ran along the road like scars across the earth. In the distance, a weathered barn leaned into the wind, its roof patched with tin. A single figure moved beside it, leading a horse toward the corral. Mary slowed the truck without thinking. She had the address scrawled on a torn piece of paper sent by her cousin, who said the man here was looking for help and would take in a woman with children, so long as she could work. She had not written back. She hadn't the strength to hope. Mary parked in the drive and shut off the engine. It coughed once, then died into silence. Her boys looked at her. Is it? Ethan asked. She nodded. What if he says no? Thomas whispered. She got out without answering, boots sinking slightly into the dry earth. The air smelled of hay and old iron. Her dress clung to her with sweat. She wiped her hands on her skirt and stood a moment, watching the man in the distance. He moved slow, deliberate, his back to her. She stepped forward. He didn't turn until she was nearly to the corral. When he did, his eyes flicked once to her face, then to the truck, then to the children watching from the cab. He was tall, sun-worn, with lines around his eyes that might have been from squinting into too many long days. He wore a plain shirt and old jeans, a hat shadowing most of his expression. His voice came low and careful. You Mary Ellen? She nodded. Mary. He looked past her again. Them yours? Yes. He paused. The horse beside him snorted and flicked its ears. You know anything about cattle? He asked. I know enough. You know how to keep your boys from running wild? Yes. He stared at her a beat longer. Then he nodded once. Get them inside. We'll talk over supper. That was all. No smile, no welcome. Just a gate opening and a man who didn't turn to watch her go. Still, it was more than she'd dared to expect. She walked back to the truck without looking at her boys. She could feel the tears in her throat like stones. Not joy. Not yet. But something had opened. Maybe that was enough. The house was plain, square, and solid. The kind of place built by someone who did not care for decoration but knew how to make things last. A low porch ran along the front, its boards sun-bleached and splintering. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and something stewed low on the stove, beans maybe, or salt pork. Mary moved through the space like a ghost, unsure of her right to stay. The boys followed close, silent. She noticed a pair of muddy boots by the door, a faded photograph tacked above the hearth, a Bible worn thin on the corner shelf. Everything clean, but nothing soft. No lace, no laughter caught in the corner. The man he had introduced himself only as James set out plates at the table without ceremony. He said little through the meal, asked the boys' names, nodded at their answers, and then fell quiet again. Mary watched the way he moved, economical and quiet, like a man used to working alone. His hands were rough, nicked and calloused. His voice, when it came, was the kind that didn't ask to be listened to, but was. "You'd be keeping house," he said, without looking up. "Cooking, laundry, teaching them boys if you can. He'll pay you some. Not much. Board and room, and you eat with us. That all right?" She nodded. Her throat was tight. "That's more than fair." He glanced at her then. "Not charity. I don't take it." He gave a single, quiet nod. That seemed to settle it. Later, after the dishes were washed and the boys were asleep on a pallet of quilts in the spare room, Mary stepped out onto the porch alone. The wind had died down. Stars scattered across the sky in cold brilliance. She folded her arms against the chill and leaned against the post. Her body ached, not just from the long drive, but from the months before it, the carrying, the burying, the leaving. She thought of the kitchen table in Kansas, empty now. The door she had shut for the last time. The grave under the cottonwood. She pressed a hand to her chest, as if to steady something inside her that had not stopped shaking. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. James stepped out, a match flaring between his fingers as he lit a pipe. He stayed quiet a long while, then said, "You come from bad times." She looked at him, surprised by the plainness of it. "Yes." He nodded once. "Same here." The wind moved across the yard like an animal searching. She waited, but he said nothing more. Just stood beside her, pipe smoke curling upward, eyes fixed on the black horizon. A silence settled between them, not awkward, something else, like standing beside a stranger in a church pew. To people who didn't know each other's story, but both knew loss in the same tongue. Finally, he said, "The roof leaks some in the back. Rain's not likely, but I'll show you in the morning." She said thank you, but he was already walking back inside. Mary stayed a while longer, until her fingers grew numb with cold. She looked out over the dark land and tried to imagine herself in it, not just surviving, but planting root. The idea felt dangerous, like hoping for rain in the middle of a drought. But the door was open. The boys were warm, and someone had looked her in the eye and offered her work without pity. It was love. It was salvation. But it was a place to stand. Write on, subscribe, and don't fade into the dust. Morning broke hard and gray, with clouds stretched thin like old cotton above the plains. Mary was up before the boys, her body remembering chores before memory could catch up. She moved through the quiet kitchen with practiced ease, set water to boil, swept the floor, opened the windows to the sharp dawn air. James was already out in the barn. She watched him from the window, the way he moved through the yard with steady purpose. He led a soul mare to water, checked the gate on the far pasture, paused to rub the dog's head when it came trotting up from the field. He didn't look toward the house, but she felt something in the way he carried himself. Not wary exactly, just contained. By the time he came in, she had coffee on breakfast waiting, cornbread, eggs, and what was left of the ham from the night before. He nodded his thanks, barely spoke, but she noticed the second helping he took in the way. He lingered a moment after the last bite. The boys ate without fuss. The silence at the table was no longer tight, it was just quiet. After breakfast, he stood from the table and set down his cup. "He'll show you around." Outside, the air was clean and cold. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and old earth. Mary followed James across the yard, her boots crunching over frost-hardened ground. He pointed out the well, the wood pile, the hen house, and the 2 milk cows in the small pen behind the barn. "You'll need to see to them if you're out driving cattle." "I am too hard." "I've done worse," she said. He nodded. "You'll keep the eggs and milk for the house. If anything's extra, sell it or trade with the Thompsons down the road." They walked the length of the barn, where he paused to fix a latch with an old nail he pulled from his shirt pocket. Mary watched him work. There was a steadiness to him she had not seen in a long time. He moved like a man who'd stopped waiting for things to change, and instead just kept fixing what broke. When he straightened, he looked at her for a long moment. "This place, it was mine to start with," he said. "My brother built it. Died in a flood 6 years back. Left me the land, though I never asked for it. Just figured I owed him not to waste it." Mary didn't speak. The weight in his voice was not something to interrupt. "Folks say I should have sold, but I don't take to being told." She almost smiled. He looked away then, out toward the bare field and the sky stretched wide above it. "Don't expect to be thanked for any of it. Just want the work done." "I didn't come for favors," she said quietly. He met her eyes again. "Good." They walked back toward the house, neither of them speaking, but something had shifted. Not softened exactly, but opened, like a gate latched in the wind. That afternoon, she washed linens and mended shirts at the porch table while the boys ran in the yard. She showed Thomas how to feed the hens without spooking them, reminded Ethan to chop kindling with both hands firm on the axe. James passed through now and then, offering a quiet word and nod, never lingering. Once he brought her a tin of sewing needles he'd found in a drawer out in the barn, set it beside her hand and walked off before she could thank him. She didn't follow him. She just looked down at the tin rusted sum at the edges and held it in her palm. Not much, but it meant something. That night after supper the boys fell asleep without protest. Mary sat by the stove, darning socks in the quiet. James read by lamplight, the firelight catching in his worn features. He didn't speak, neither did she, but the silence between them no longer felt like distance. It felt like space being made. The days began to stretch one into the next, like fence wire pulled taut across miles. Mary woke before the sun and moved through the house with calm precision. Her hands learned the seams of the place. She came to know which boards groaned underfoot, how much salt James preferred in his eggs, the exact hour the wind shifted from north to west. Work kept her steady. She scrubbed and baked, patched and taught. The boys changed too. Ethan stopped flinching when doors closed too hard. Thomas began singing to himself again, chasing chickens and dragging sticks through the dirt like swords. They still asked about their father, but less often, and not at night. Mary kept the grief folded deep inside, like a letter she could not burn but refused to reread. She saw James most in passing. He came and went with the quiet purpose of a man who had made peace with solitude. But slowly, the space between them shortened. One morning he lingered by the stove while she poured coffee. "You always bake on Fridays?" he asked. She glanced at him. "That's when the flour's low and the boys need something to look forward to." He nodded, thoughtful. That evening he brought into fresh sacks of flour and a jar of preserves. Didn't say where from, just left them on the table with a quiet, "Figured you could use it." Another day she found a new spool of thread beside her mending basket. When she thanked him he shrugged. "Figured it might help." The house began to feel less like something borrowed. She rearranged the kitchen shelves, hung the boys' drawings near the window, sewed new curtains from old feed sacks. James didn't stop her. He didn't offer praise either. But one night at supper he said, "House looks brighter these days." Mary didn't answer right away. Her chest felt too tight. Later, while the boys washed up, she stepped outside with James. The light was soft, the kind that folds into things. She said, "You ever think of leaving this place?" He leaned against the post beside her. "Used to." "Why didn't you?" "Because it already buried too much here." His voice wasn't angry, just tired. She turned to look at him, and something in his face was different. Not soft, but unguarded. "You ever wish things had gone another way?" she asked. He took a long breath. "Wishing don't fix a thing," he said. "But I do think about what I'd do different." "Like what?" He hesitated. "Maybe I wouldn't have shut so many people out. Maybe I'd have listened more. Let someone stay." The quiet between them turned heavy but not bitter, the kind of silence where you could almost hear the words unsaid. James didn't move. His hands were in his pockets, eyes on the edge of the pasture. Then, quietly, he said, "What about you?" Mary stared out across the land, the fence lines, the hills beyond, the faraway flicker of the windmill turning slow in the dusk. "I wish I'd asked for help sooner," she said. "I kept thinking it was weakness, letting someone see how bad I'd gotten." He didn't respond, but when she glanced at him, he met her eyes. There was something like understanding there. Maybe forgiveness, too. She went inside first. He followed a while later. Nothing passed between them that night but the echo of what had been shared. Still, it settled in her like warmth held in a stone after the fire's gone out. Winter showed early signs by the 1st of November. The mornings came colder, with a rim of frost along the windows and the breath of the cows steaming in the air. Mary rose each day in a heavier coat, her fingers stiff as she built the morning fire. The boys stacked wood without being asked now. They no longer looked like strangers in this place. Their boots left the same lines in the dust as James's did. It was near dusk when the stranger came. Mary had just pulled biscuits from the oven when the dog barked once, sharp and unfamiliar. James stepped out onto the porch and didn't return right away. She watched through the window. A tall man in a city coat stood beside a pale horse, too clean for a rancher. The set of his shoulders said he hadn't come to visit. She dried her hands and went outside. James didn't turn when she stepped up beside him. His jaw was set, arms folded tight. The stranger had a kind of slick calm to him, like a man used to signing papers other folks didn't read. Evening, he said, tipping his hat to Mary. Didn't expect to find a woman here. "Just not your concern," James said. The man looked her over, not with cruelty, just calculation. "Name's Hal Trenton. I'm a lawyer out of Denver, sent by the county to confirm a land title dispute." Mary felt something shift in James, though he stayed still. "The title's clear," James said. "Has been for years." Trenton pulled a folded document from his coat. "The bank's looking to reclaim liens from past accounts tied to your brother's holdings. Some records suggest there was never proper transfer. That land might still be contested." James didn't take the paper. "You'll need to prove that in court, which is where I'd rather not go," Trenton said, smiling with no warmth. "They sent me to make you an offer. You take the buyout, walk away clean, save the trouble." Mary watched James's face harden. Not fear, not quite anger either, just a long, tired defiance. "Get off my land," he said. The man tucked the paper back into his coat and touched the brim of his hat again. "You've got till the end of the month. After that, I vow." He turned and rode off like it was nothing, his horse kicking up dust as he went. James didn't move until the man was gone. Then he sat down on the porch step, elbows on his knees, head bowed. Mary stood beside him a long moment, then sat too, keeping a small space between them. "You knew it might come to this," she said. "I thought it was over," he muttered. "Been years. I paid off what I could, but there's always some piece of paper hiding in a drawer somewhere." "What will you do?" He didn't answer. The boys came to the doorway quiet. Mary rose and ushered them back inside. She served dinner, but James didn't come in. When she checked again, he was still on the porch, hat in his hands, the sky going full dark behind him. That night, she lay awake long after the boys had gone to sleep, staring at the ceiling. Her heart ached with something she didn't want to name. She had just started to believe this place could hold them. She had just started to believe in him. Out in the cold, a man was sitting with the weight of everything he couldn't say, and Mary had no words to ease it, only presence. In the dark, that would have to be enough. The next days came quiet and strange. James spoke little. He ate, worked, and slept like a man walking underwater. Mary watched him with a tightening in her chest. He didn't mention the papers or the lawyer, but in small ways she saw the weight of it, how he stood longer at the edge of the field, how he lingered over the books on the shelf, fingers tracing old spines without opening them. One night after supper she found him in the barn sitting on a hay bale, sharpening a tool he didn't seem to need. She stepped inside and leaned against the doorframe. "They did buy you out?" she asked. He didn't look at her. "Sure. Not for what it's worth, though. Just enough to start over somewhere colder and meaner." "You ever think of taking it?" "Thought about a lot of things," he said. "Thought about what this place was supposed to be, what my brother built, what I've tried to hold on to. Thought maybe I could turn it into something else." She took a step closer. "Maybe you still can." He looked up at her then, eyes lined with exhaustion. "You and the boys. You came here and made it feel like something again. I thought maybe I was building towards something good, not just holding the walls up." She didn't reply, just sat beside him, her skirt brushing the hay. "I don't want to lose it," he said quietly, "but I don't know how to keep it either." She touched his arm. "You're not alone." He looked down at her hand and up at her. There was something in his face, something raw and without mask. "You'd stay," he said, "even if it all fell apart?" She met his gaze. "I've lived through worse." A silence held between them, full of old wounds and unspoken choices. "I never wanted to need anyone," he said. "I know," she whispered. Me neither. He set the tool down and took her hand in his. His fingers were rough, but the grip was gentle. For a long time they sat like that, not speaking, the air in the barn soft with the scent of hay and old wood. Later, when the boys were asleep and the lamps were low, Mary sat with James at the table, a map spread before them. He pointed out parcels of land, dead sowed, what HED paid, what he called it. She listened, asked questions, took notes. They worked through it together, and slowly, a plan began to form. Not an easy one, not certain, but real. The next day, they rode to the Thompsons and asked for help drawing up a formal appeal. Mary offered to teach their girls in exchange for the use of their typewriter. James swallowed his pride and explained what the bank was trying to do. Sometimes, he said afterward, as they rode back under the pale winter sky, the only way to keep something is to let folks know it's worth fighting for. Mary looked at him. Maybe it's not the land they need to believe in. He turned to her. What then? You? He held her gaze a long moment, then nodded once, like a man stepping out onto thin ice, not because it was safe, but because standing still was no longer an option. The hearing was set for the second Monday in December, in the courthouse 2 towns over a long dotted road through wind-scrubbed prairie. James dressed in his best, though the collar of his shirt didn't sit right and he kept tugging at it like it was choking him. Mary wore the same dark dress she had worn to Will's funeral, but with a new hem and a clean ribbon in her hair. The boys stayed behind with the Thompsons, who offered their buggy and packed a jar of coffee and bread wrapped in cloth. They rode in silence for a while. Then James said, "You don't have to come in with me." Mary turned to him. "You think it'd stay outside while a man tries to take your land?" He gave her a look, small and grateful. Inside the courthouse, everything smelled of ink and dust. The lawyer, Trenton, waited by the bench, flipping through his papers like he already knew the outcome. James stood tall, his hat in hand, his shoulders squared with quiet resolve. Mary sat behind him, hands clasped so tightly they ached. The hearing was short. The judge, a gray old man with tobacco-stained fingers, listened without expression as Trenton laid out his claim technicalities, old filings, bank records lost and found. Then James stood. "No lawyer, no notes. My brother died 6 years ago," he said. "Left me the land in writing. I paid off his debts. This here's my home. I've kept the fences up, paid my taxes, never missed a season. This ain't just land to me, it's a life. You take it, and it doesn't go to some widow or a farmer. It goes to a company that don't care if it dries out." The judge looked at him, then at Mary. "You stand with him." She rose to her feet. "Yes, sir." Trenton opened his mouth, but the judge held up a hand. "I've heard enough." He signed the ruling then and there. The title was upheld. James didn't move for a long moment. Then he turned to Mary and let out a breath that sounded like he hadn't taken one in weeks. Outside, the wind had kicked up. Snow fell in slow, uncertain flakes. In the buggy, James sat behind the reins but didn't flick them right away. He looked at her, his face still as stone. "I didn't think we'd win." "You didn't think you deserved to," she said. He blinked. "Maybe not." She touched his gloved hand. "Well, you do." The return ride was quiet. Not the heavy kind, the peaceful kind. The kind where the people share warmth under a blanket and don't need to speak. When they got home, the boys ran from the porch, shouting questions. James crouched to meet them, arms open, and for the first time since Mary had met him, she saw him laugh openly, without reservation. Later, after the supper dishes were cleared and the boys laid angled in quilts and dreams, Mary stepped outside to find James at the edge of the yard, staring out over the dark fields. She joined him. He didn't turn. "You really staying?" he asked. She took his arm. "Already here." He looked at her, his eyes searching. "It ain't much, what I have. It's more than I ever thought I'd find again." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled something small from it. Her breath caught. A plain silver band, worn thin with age. "Was my mother's," he said. "She wore it through hotter years than this. Figured if it could last that long, maybe we could too." Mary took it from his hand. He didn't kneel, didn't ask in words, but she nodded. And that was answer enough. The wedding was quiet. No preacher, no crowd. Just James, Mary, the boys, and Mrs. Thompson reading from her Bible with a voice that quivered in the cold. They stood under the bare cottonwoods out back, breath rising in clouds, the wind rustling through dry leaves like whispered approval. Ethan held the ring. Thomas clutched a handful of wild grass H.E.D. called a bouquet. Mary wore her cleanest dress, hem mended again, boots polished till they shone. James looked almost startled in his freshly brushed coat, like a man unused to being seen. When Mrs. Thompson said the words and James took Mary's hand, he didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, long and steady, his jaw working like he was chewing something too big to swallow. Then he said, soft and certain, "You saved me." Mary didn't answer. She just squeezed his hand and blinked back tears that burned against the wind. Afterward, they ate biscuits and molasses in the kitchen, the boys crunching pickles and giggling at the way James poured coffee without spilling a drop. There was no toast, no music, just warmth, the kind that settles deep and lasts. That night, after the boys had fallen asleep in their new shared room, the one James had cleared and painted without saying a word, Mary stood in the doorway of what was now their room and watched James take off his boot. He looked up at her like he was quite sure how to be in the moment. "You don't have to be anything but here," she said. He nodded, but didn't come to her right away. Instead, he pulled something from the drawer, a folded paper, yellowed and soft at the creases. He held it out. "It's from my brother," he said. "Left it with the deed. I never showed anyone." She took it gently undressed. It was long, just a few lines scrawled in a blunt, thick hand. "You're the only one I trust not to run. Build something with it. Don't just survive." Mary looked up. James swallowed hard. "I thought it failed him. Until you came." She stepped forward and took his face in her hands. "You didn't fail. You waited." That night they lay together, not like people trying to forget the past, but like people choosing to carry it side by side, evenly, finally. Outside, the wind slowed. Snow whispered across the roof. The house creaked softly in the dark like it, too, had taken a deep breath. And in the quiet, their hands found each other. Not desperate, not afraid, just home. By early spring, green had begun to show in places Mary had forgotten to look. The grass came back in tufts, cautious but determined. Buds pushed from the branches of the cottonwoods behind the house. Cows were born late but healthy. The fields, still raw from winter, promised something, if not abundance, then at least a chance. The house changed too, though not in ways you do notice right off. There was laughter now, and the sound of chairs being moved, boys shouting from the barn, Mary humming while she cooked. A second coat hung beside James' at the door. 2 cups left out in the morning instead of 1. They had started building a henhouse addition, not because they needed it yet, but because James said we might. Mary caught the way he said, "We like it had always been that way." One morning she stood on the porch and watched the boys race across the yard, boots kicking up mud. James was fixing the fence post near the road, the sun at his back, sleeves rolled, hat tipped low. He paused to wave. Something stirred in her, then not a flutter, not a rush, just the steady ache of gratitude. She stepped inside, moved to the kitchen, and opened the drawer where she kept the letter from Will. Only a few lines written before he got sick. "If it gets worse, and I can't hold things together, take the boys west. Don't let them grow up bitter, and don't let them bury you too early." She folded the letter again, slower this time, laid it back in the drawer and shut it for good. Later that week, James came in from the barn, brushing dust from his shirt, and looked at her like he had something to say. She waited. He handed her a carved piece of wood, small, round, polished smooth. "It's not much," he said, "but I made it for the baby, if we're lucky." Mary looked at him, then at the token in her palm. Her eyes stung. "You knew?" "I figured," he said. "You've been eating like you mean it again." She laughed then, not loud, but it filled the room. That night, the 4 of them sat around the fire. Ethan whittled, tongue tucked at the corner of his mouth. Thomas tried to teach the dog a trick it would never learn. Mary stitched slowly, pausing to rest her hand on her belly. James sat back in his chair, boots crossed, watching it all. No one said the word future, but it was there. In the lamp glow, in the slow creak of the rocking chair, in the simple fact that they were all still here. The storm had passed. They hadn't just survived it. They'd stayed. They'd each chosen one another. And now, in the soft hush of spring, they were building something that could last. The next legend waits. Subscribe now.